Okay, I want to. Come on. Okay, I want to.
Good morning, all. I have the high sign from the secretary, and I want to welcome you to the second ad hoc committee meeting of the service boards and we at the RTA. And this is the ad hoc committee on transit funding. The goal of our meeting today is to gather the committee's input on the 2025 ADA paratransit budget gap and the overall ADA program. As I saw Chairman Kwasniewski, or talked to Chairman Kwasniewski last night, 2025 and 2026 on paratransit are somewhat tied together, as you will see in a presentation today. We're also going to discuss the 2026 and through 2028 operating funding amounts and required 2026 recovery ratios, and the 5-year capital program for CTA Metra and PACE suburban service. This input, hopefully we can come to some consensus today on ADA paratransit, which will help. But the input shared today by all of you will be shared with the RTA board for full consideration at our August 21st, 25 meeting as part of the ongoing budget development process. Just want to review a couple of guidelines for our meeting today. For those of you who are participants in person, first of all, thank you very much for being here. Please turn on your microphones when you wish to speak. They'll be green for those of you who are our visitors from the service boards. And try to remember to turn it off so that we only have one microphone on at a time, as it impedes recording and other issues for people who are listening online. I'll call on you with questions or comments for those attending in person. For those of you who are calling in remotely, I know JD Ross is calling in. He's a veteran of this, but keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize the background noise, which will impair our Secretary Joey's recordings. And when you have a question or comment, raise your virtual hand and the board secretary will call on you one at a time. When she calls on you, try to remember to lower your hand and unmute yourself before speaking. Item 1 is the official call to order. With that being said, I will call the meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Transit Funding to order. And before we call our roll, our board secretary has received notice from Director Lewis that he's unable to attend today's meeting. And he's asked Director Gorman, where's Liz? Right here, Director Gorman to attend in his place. Our board secretary has received notice from Director Ryan that she is unable to attend today, and she's asked Director Koterick, where's Tom's over here, to attend in her place. Both substitutions are allowed since the designees are from the standing committees, members from the same appointing authority. Now, Madam Secretary, call the roll, please.
Good morning, everyone. Director Carey? Here. Director Gorman? Here. Director Katar?
Here.
Director Mondero?
Here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Yonan?
Here.
And Chairman Dillard.
Here.
We have 7 present.
And we have received completed notice from Director Ross that he cannot attend in person, and pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, he is deemed admitted unless anybody here has an objection. Seeing no objection, JD, you're admitted, my friend. Item 3, the approval of the minutes from the July 24th, 25 ad hoc committee. Any comments or corrections from what was sent out? If not, how about a motion in a second? Director Carey motions, seconded by Director Koterek, that we approve the minutes from July 24. I guess, Joey, take a roll call if you would, Madam Secretary.
Sure. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Gorman? Aye. Director Katar?
Aye.
Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Aye.
Director Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
7 ayes.
And those minutes are approved. Item 4 is the public comment section of our meeting. Is there anyone present that wishes to testify today from the audience? Seeing none. Joey, we don't have any written comments, do
We
we?
have received no written comments.
So we will move on to item 5 on regional budget issues, which is really the purpose of this committee. And our Chief Financial Officer, Kevin Buseo, will be presenting. Bill Lackman, our wonderful treasurer, is also making his way up.
Mr. Chairman, could I have the record reflect that Bill Colson is present remotely?
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Bill, for joining. I hope you're somewhere pleasant, but I know you're working because I read your social media, so I know you're out there working.
Chairman, Director Rotondo and then Director Groven. Director Rotondo is remote.
Okay, super. Thank you very much, Director. It's good. I'm glad there's this much participation and interest. Okay, Kevin, Bill, thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kevin Bueso, and I'm the CFO for the RTA. Today, we're going to go through the items that the chairman mentioned. So 2025 ADA funding, as well as 2026. And then the marks, as well as the operating marks and the capital marks. We're going to throw a lot of numbers at you today, so please, if anything is unclear or you want more clarification, please let us know. But there'll be a lot of numbers that are thrown at you. The first thing is we want to get resolution or advice, recommendation, consensus on these 4 items that we're going to bring to the board next week. And so keep that in mind. I know that all of these items are interrelated, so any changes on any of the proposals here does have a trickle-down effect on what we're going to propose for operating as well as 2026. So just, again, keep that in mind. This is a follow-up from our July 24th ad hoc committee meeting that we had. Since then, the task force that is made up of the staff at the service boards and the RTA met on July 31st, and we went through a lot of this information, and we're going to present almost the same information with a little bit more detail from what was discussed during that task force meeting. Next slide, please. So ADA funding being the first one for, again, this section will cover 2025 funding as well as 2026. If we go to the next slide, please. So a little bit of background on this. As far as the steps that we have taken. So in 2024, the traditional ADA program has been enhanced with an additional subsidized program, and this program is called the Rideshare Access Program, or RAP. It's similar to Taxi Access Program, and this is offered, again, to all the ADA paratransit certified riders. And these offers more flexibility and more mobility, which again, the RTA fully supports. But as we approach the fiscal cliff, we must balance that innovation with a strict financial discipline and the careful stewardship of our limited funds, which again, we have talked about. So here's where we stand right now. In May, the board approved using $25.5 million of the ADA reserve that we had. That left this fund with only $8.3 million to cover any gaps. And so in June, the RTA board adopted the action plan or that to slow down the cost that we have seen, or the growth in cost that we have seen in this program, and as well as managed ridership. We have been working with PACE on these, and I know we're looking into or PACE is targeting implementation Q4 of this year to implement. Again, that's pending board approval, and I know they're going through a hearing process as well. So it's pending that process. In July, this committee discussed, on July 24th, this committee discussed a shared sacrifice approach to resolving this issue of 2025, which again, we discussed during the meeting that we had on July 31st. I'll just be upfront about that. There's no general consensus or agreement there. That's one of the items that we want to bring to this committee to get that consensus in that direction. Today, we are moving from the concept to action. So we have a specific recommendations that require your guidance. And sort of before we move on to the 2026 budget preparation, we have to unlock this item. We cannot move forward because, again, that has that trickle down effect in terms of what needs to be funded in 2026. So that item has to be resolved before we move on. Next slide, please. We have updated this chart from the June board meeting with a couple more months of ridership results. And so you'll see that information there. In April and May, ridership access program continued to grow rapidly. Combined RAP and TAP ridership shown by on this chart surpassed traditional ADA ridership during the first quarter of 2025, and it will exceed 300,000 rides per month. So traditional ADA ridership, which is shown as well here, has remained steady at around 225,000 rides per month. So these results continue to indicate that the new RAP rides are largely incremental rather than diverting demand from traditional ADA. So again, as this program becomes more popular, new people are coming in and riding it instead of sort of the original goal being moving people from traditional ADA to rideshare because of the cost. So unfortunately, that's not happening. But this is one of the main reasons why we're here today. So next slide, please. The monthly ridership trends on the previous slide translate into the projected annual ridership variance shown on this chart. So overall, ADA ridership is now expected to exceed budget by about 2.2 million, or more than 50% of what was projected, with that variance focused specifically on the RAP program. So on the other hand, TAP and traditional ADA ridership are projected to finish close to budget at a cost of approximately $22 per ride. This 2 million ride variance translates into a 2025 budget shortfall of about 50 million, as we have communicated to the board and the committee in the past. The mitigating components of the RTA action plan shown here should have a dampening effect on that total shortfall. And we have, again, communicated what that action plan impact would be. PACE has completed a series of public hearings and on these recommended actions. And again, we're anticipating implementation by October 1st, pending PACE's board approval, and again, what feedback they're getting through that hearing process. If we can go to the next slide, please. So again, going in line with the shared sacrifice discussion that we had last time at this ad hoc committee, we're proposing what you see on this slide, and we'll go through it. So with these trends in mind and the guidance from the July ad hoc committee, staff recommends a shared sacrifice scenario for the additional 2025 funding projected to be required for ADA paratransit. The currently projected unconstrained shortfall of $53 million is expected to be reduced by about $8 million if the mitigating measures are implemented for the fourth quarter of this year. Specifically, the fare restoration to $3.25 and the 30 ride per month cap. These measures result in a projected shortfall of $45 million, as we're showing here. As part of the remedy, staff recommends allocating the remaining ADA paratransit reserve of $8.3 million and the 17.5 million, which is again sales tax 1, and that's the incremental portion that the RTA has discretion over. So allocating that 17.5 million towards that, that leaves a gap of 19.4 million. And so that would be, as we're outlining here, PACE funding. We're part of that discussion is today. What does that mean? And we are looking for that direction today. And of course, we're glad to see PACE at the table so that we can have that conversation. If we can go to the next slide, please. We have presented some of this information in the past. So at the June meeting, we did bring a funding proposal as well in line with the action plan that included the items that you see here. There are several options that to meet that increased 2025 funding need. As I mentioned earlier, the 8.3 million remain in the dedicated ADA paratransit reserve. We view these as the first option in terms of funding, but obviously it's not enough. Second, the RTA has been experiencing a timely increase in sales tax collections due to the extension of the RTA sales tax to more online transactions. And we will discuss that impact as we talked, the sort of global impact on the funding marks for 2026 and this increase in sales tax. But at least for this part, we are proposing the 17.5 million of that increased sales tax 1. So like the ADA paratransit reserve, this source of funding does not impact the operating funding currently budgeted for CTA, Metro, and PACE. Incidentally, this $17 million figure is up from $13 million that we communicated last month due to a change in assumptions that, again, we will discuss that during the funding marks conversation. The use of innovation, coordination, and enhancement funding was also suggested by this committee. However, 2023 innovation, coordination, and enhancement funding has already been programmed for projects, and the RTA would have to work with the service boards to deobligate these funds. So we have talked during the task force meetings and conversations about this funding, and there is sort of general agreement consensus that this would be an option. But again, we already granted some of these funding, so there will be a process that we need to follow to get access to these funding. So for those reasons, we're also not recommending these. It's not part of the original staff recommendation that you saw on the previous slide. We also do not recommend increasing 2025 ADA funding from RTA sales tax and PTF2 because this would move funding from mainline services. And again, it would have that trickle down impact on funding operations in the 2026 marks that we're preparing to talk about. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, this is a general timeline of what we are recommending or what we see happening. An annual August board meeting or board item is the certification of the second quarter financial results of all of the service boards. The ADA results or the ADA paratransit program results through June will show an unfavorable operating deficit variance in excess of 10%. And this will require finding of not in substantial accordance with the budget. Such finding requires PACE to submit the RTA a revised budget for ADA within 30 days. Then the shared sacrifice scenario that includes the RTA funds will first require ADA paratransit funding amendment, also be considered at the August board meeting, so next week. That funding amendment would include only the 2 proposed RTA components of the shared sacrifice solution, totaling $25.8 million, with a third component of funding, $19.4 million coming from PACE. Pace staff is expected to take a revised, fully funded 2025 ADA paratransit budget for the September 17th Pace board meeting. So they would take, assuming that there's consensus on how this is done, they will take this item to their board on September 17th. Once that revised budget is adopted, Pace will submit it to the RTA staff and for consideration at the October RTA board meeting. At the November board meeting, we will present the third quarter financial results, assuming or using the newly adopted ADA budget for 2025. So again, a lot of information, a lot of steps that need to happen. So this is 2025. So for right now, if you can park all of that information on the side, and then we can talk about 2026, because again, they're all interrelated, and this is how we're proposing to address 2026, which is a bigger challenge, higher amount. There's a lot more at stake on that. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So here's what we have done for 2026. We've broken it down between what's traditional ADA and then what's wrap and tap in terms of the budget. This table breaks down the preliminary 2026 ADA paratransit budget in the two parts that I just mentioned. Without constraints, the total funding requirement, again, is projected at 355 million. That's the total operating expense of 384 or 385 minus the 30 million in operating revenue. So again, that takes into account that's the $3.25 fare. The mitigating measures scheduled for the fourth quarter of 2025 are expected to deliver about $30 million in annual savings, reducing the need to $325 million. So you'll see that mitigating actions, $30 million, that gets it down to that 325. So then there's $255 million for traditional ADA and $70 million for wrap and tap. For 2026, the state has increased its contribution. Increase is sort of an overused word here, but we're going to use it. $11.5 million of the total program. So as you can see, it's less than 5% of the total cost of this program. And the proposed RTA marks maintain the previously approved 2026 funding level at $268.6 million. So this is from the 2026 plan. Again, this fully covers the traditional ADA need and adds $25 million towards wrap and tap. However, as it's noted here, it does leave $45 million in budget gap that Pace would be expected or proposed as it is right now. Again, that's part of this discussion today. So this approach ensures that sales tax funding is maximized and that the mainline services stay funded at the level, including the increase in sales tax. So at this time, we're looking for that direction. We're going to pause here, have that discussion before we move on to the 2026 operating funding marks. So at this time, we'll take any questions, comments. I'm sure Pace has some comments on these proposals as well. So again, the idea is not to move forward from these items until we got consensus from this committee that we can make recommendations that everybody agrees on. I wouldn't say everybody's happy with, but everybody agrees with to the RTA board next week.
So my suggestion would be sort of to go around the horn, so to speak, either Chairman Kwasniewski or Melinda or both. And then we'll hear from Mr. Derwinski, Chairman McMahon, Nora, and Chairman Barkley, if we could. But just kind of I talked to Rick yesterday, but Melinda and Rick, what's your thoughts here?
I guess. So as I talked to you last night, Kurt, I think, one of the things that I think we've actually looked at is seeing if there's a way to, certainly participate in this. I think one of the ways initially could be some kind of a loan type of situation where we would loan the money for this program. I mean, obviously it's something that, ADA is funded through the RTA coming off the top. this is kind of a piggyback program that, quite frankly, not only RTA, but PACE agreed to do. And obviously, I think the success of the program is probably more from a convenience, standpoint for a lot of the ADA riders, that it's a lot easier to do rather than, schedule something a day in advance. So I think, it kind of took off. And obviously, I think, recommendations from your board in regards to how this program moves forward, in regards to what it costs and, quite frankly, how many rides and all those things. I think that's something that I think, certainly should be looked at and evaluated. So, I think we're certainly willing to do that. I mean, obviously, about 80% of the rides are in the city of Chicago, 20% are approximately in the suburbs and so forth. So I think we, I guess, our board, is gonna have to really look at this and see if whether or not they want to use suburban bus money for ADA, throughout the region. And, again, I think we're trying to look at this as how do we work together to try to get this done. So I think, I'm gonna have staff try to work with your staff, to kind of go through some of these numbers and so forth, and see if there's some other way that we can, help participate. So, Melinda, you want to add anything, or?
I think the chairman has stated it really well. The RTA Act makes it clear that the RTA is responsible for funding the service. PACE is willing to work to the best of our ability with the RTA to come up with a solution, but our solution at this point is a loan from Suburban Bus, because we do have plans for our Suburban Bus money. We have our revision plan that we want to implement. And as the chairman indicated, over 80% of the service is in the city of Chicago. So you're asking the Suburban Bus Board to deviate suburban funding into the city of Chicago, which we can do on a temporary basis if it's a loan.
Questions or comments for either of the two PACE representatives? I was doing some math here. I mean, what would happen if we went to $5 as opposed to $3.50? What do you think would happen to your ridership?
We can run some numbers on that. I do think the ridership levels will drop. We just finished public hearings to move up the fare to 3.25. Obviously, when we get into the 2026 budget hearings, there is a request from the RTA to do a 10% across the board fare increase, which will move it up from the 325. We can look at putting other options out there also.
I think you ought to look at 5, and then I know there's, now we're sort of at 30, but even if somebody took this service to go to work, 30 is still perhaps high, but that's also something we probably should, this is for my board, probably think about. How have your hearings gone?
We had a lot of public comment. We had over 350 people either testify in person or in writing. The vast majority of the comments were how much they appreciate the RAP program and that they now can go to work. Many people have actually started jobs because they're using RAP to go to work, their medical appointments, et cetera. Overwhelmingly, they really support the program. The fare increase, they did not appear to be so bothered about, but they wanted more than the 30 rides. That was a big comment that we heard. I will also state that although the cap is $30 per trip, our average is about $25 in the city and about $20 in the suburbs.
I want to remind, I think most of you in this room know, I mean, Rap and Tap, while the ADA has to come off the top, Rap and Tap is really not part of what has to come off the tap, or off the top. It's amazing, Melinda, I tell people, I tell legislators, they always want innovation, right? And they always want to, well, here's innovation, and it's taken off like a rocket. It would be nice if Springfield on a federal civil rights mandate. This is not really a transportation mandate, as I've been warned or reminded by US DOT. This is, Mr. McMahon would understand this is probably better than anybody here. This is a civil rights mandate, with federal court cases ordering us, and US DOT has told me, this is not a transportation mandate. You got bigger issues with federal civil rights laws as well. A population, as I told you last time, Melinda and Rick, that I am very, very, very sympathetic toward. No good deed goes unpunished. We asked for innovation, we got it, and wow. It's amazing, Melinda, how many people have stopped me because they now, especially parents, siblings, and others. So I've had a couple of people, tell me how wonderful the program has been for their mother, for their brother. And when I mentioned the $5, they voluntarily say, and will readily pay more. And I understand what the population's like, that, there's a lot of indigent and other folks that, really have some income pressures. So I'm familiar with that, but the program's been great. The other thing that I told my staff here at the RTA is the people that have stopped me have told me how wonderful our staff is here at the RTA, how they treat these folks with tremendous dignity and help. And I kidded them. I said, well, normally we get complaints, but how about a testimonial to how compassionate and how well we are when they get here to sign up for the program. So, Nora and Lester, what do you think, especially in light of the fact that most of these folks come from the city and your sort of bailiwick as to your service areas, and what's your shared sacrifice? What's your view on that?
Sure. Well, first I want to thank everyone for coming together to talk about this regionally. I think it's the kind of thing that people want to see. To your point, Chairman Dillard, I think the distinction of city and suburb in this context, that's the way the program's designed, right? So it's meant to cover all of that. So I mean, where the ridership comes from, city versus suburb, is an interesting point, but the structure of the program is meant to cover the city. So I think this entire question of the drastic increase in usage in this program is an important one for us to look at as a region and really dive in to what's going on there. What you're seeing there is a lot more than just an increase in the Rapid Tap program. I think you're seeing people that have a need for various reasons that are having trouble getting somewhere more easily, that have to do with our regional ADA approach. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us all to dive into this story for some lessons and understandings to guide us moving forward. What you're seeing there is people having path of travel issues with sidewalks, and partnerships we should be having across our region in different ways. Of course, it's a story of the importance of increased accessibility from a capital perspective. I think there's probably just a ton of information that I know we're all learning already about who these riders are, why they are relying on this service as opposed to the mainline service, and how we can do better to serve them in the mainline service in the long term. Is a large part of this story as well, and that's what CTA remains committed to doing.
Yeah, I would agree. We have worked diligently to make our stations accessible to all citizens here in the city. We spent a lot of time and a lot of money to do that, to improve the conditions. This is no doubt a very popular program, and it's one that, we wholeheartedly support. But the numbers, as you say, have increased significantly. Perhaps the increase in cost, price for fares makes sense. I'd like to see what those numbers pan out based upon what you suggested. But, it puts us in a real awkward position because we want to work cooperatively with PACE, and we don't want to seem to, sort of take money from them either. But the bottom line is it's a very popular program and it's working. Like you said, this is innovation and it costs sometimes, but, we want to work cooperatively.
Leanne or Melinda, during COVID, we surveyed very extensively. What are we doing, as Nora brought up, to survey these riders, just to see really what's driving them, other than just anecdotal stuff? Are we doing any kind of survey of the riders?
Well, I can remind the board too that several months back, we provided you a very detailed analysis of both the ridership and even conversation that we have had with people calling about the programs, trying to inquire, trying to get certified, et cetera. So we continue to track and monitor that data. You probably recall that the action plan that we discussed, that the board approved, wasn't just focused, I mean, in the initial phase, it's focused on how do we get through 25 and what's the foundation funding piece for 26. But there is additional recommendations as part of that action plan beyond sort of budget revisions to look at programmatic changes across RAP and TAP to both really fundamentally to ensure the financial solvency of both ADA and RAP and TAP going forward, so we can provide as much service to, when I say we, the entire region can provide as much service out there. So if you recall, part of the action plan was also looking at anybody who is ADA certified. I'm just going to give you some of the examples. There's even more detail, and we can reshare that with the board and everybody here. But having anyone who's ADA certified be able to ride mainline service for free. So sort of that's the extra complement to not just the physical layout of the system being accessible and continuing to work towards even more accessibility, but if it's free, incenting people to look at sort of existing services that are out there, and providing to, again, a way to hopefully try to slow some of the exponential growth that we have been seeing. Additionally, during a lot of the analysis that staff did on the actual ridership, really did drill down to see who, how much were people riding, even on it wasn't normalized, it wasn't like, individual people, but looking at how many people, and if we are putting caps or future limits on sort of a number of rides, for example, that we are doing that in the most reasonable and the sort of the fairest way possible. We also, as I think you probably recall, we shared with you what peers are doing around the country with similar programs and some of the mitigation and sort of programmatic guardrails that they've put on some of those programs. And our goal would be to implement some work with PACE and look to implement more of those as we go forward. Earning, people can appeal and earning more ability to use more RAP and TAP, but not someone who's just calling up, getting certified, and then never taking a traditional ADA trip, for example, and just immediately jumping over to RAP and TAP. You talked about the fare changes, and while we're not just talking about a fare change for 26 on just the ADA side, all of us are talking about that for 26 across our budgets because of these broader fiscal constraints. But fundamentally, all of these pieces are really meant to make sure that these programs are financially sustainable so we can provide as a region as much service as possible going forward. It would be even worse to sort of consider looking at the broader fiscal cliff that we face, sort of ramping up and really growing these programs and then literally having to cut them off completely. That would be even worse than the current scenarios and sort of the joint pain that everybody is sort of talking about sharing. So I think we can reshare the analysis and data, and staff has continued to track that on a monthly basis. So we are sort of staying abreast of what's happening in terms of ridership and usage, and getting customer rider feedback as well.
Ron, Joe, and Jim?
Just a quick question. Chairman, you mentioned a $5 bump. What is the impact of that? Is that something Leanne has looked at?
That's what I was trying to ask Melinda. What do you think would happen if you went to $5?
Yeah, so my comment was that we will run some models on that, but I do think it will bring the ridership down. Either if you do it on the front end, the $5, bringing it up from $3.25 to $5, or reducing the trip length of $30 to 25, although 25 on that end, that's about our average in the city anyway. So it won't do much in that part.
What happens with fees from governments that normally go to that method of, if there's a fee on there, you all pay that fee for if there's a local government surcharge or whatever on fees?
Are you talking about the city surcharge
Yeah.
on rideshare?
Yeah.
I would assume it just gets charged. We
I
can
can,
verify that,
yeah, I
but
can
yeah, I
answer
assume
that.
it just gets charged and would go to, within the city of Chicago, it's going to the city of Chicago.
Right,
And I
so on
know,
the taxi,
Mayor Johnson has his own budget issues, so I don't want to make it worse for him, but
on the taxi access program, which is a city of Chicago program, we do pay a fee. I think it's $1.25 is my memory on that, but we do pay that.
yeah, no, it's.
I guess if I can, Chairman Dillard, and thanks for hosting us and allowing us to participate in this. I appreciate that. Really more of an observation than a comment, but the observation that I have is that really the dramatic growth over the last 18 months and that RAP and TAP program. And while we all understand the concept of shared sacrifice and both the obligation socially and legally as well to provide transportation for this constituency, I think I would explore, or I would encourage us to, before we talk about, and I get shared sacrifice as part of the discussion, but before we go directly to shared sacrifice, we should look at how this service model can get closer to funding itself. And I think you touched on it with looking at the fares or looking at the contribution from the rider, and then looking at the number of trips per month or per time period. That'll have an impact on the overall expense. And so that's an observation. This does not, I get this, I'm here on behalf of Metra, and this does not impact Metra directly. But that shared sacrifice conversation is part of a broader conversation. Today, it's PACE and ADA transit. Next month, it might be CTA. The month after that, it might be Metra. So I think we're all in favor of trying to find a regional solution. But I think we ought to start with, how do we make this service more efficient and more self-reliant? And I think two good ways that we can do that are looking at the contribution and the number of trips. Thank you.
Yeah, it does, it does impact you a little bit, because as you'll see from Kevin's next or Bill's next presentation, 40 million or 45 million is still a pretty big hole for the region, especially in these weird times, not knowing what we're going to get from the legislature in the future. Jim?
Yeah, just to echo, it's easy to be the caboose when you have a lot of great comments already made. You talked about this took off like a rocket. That's exactly what the curve on slide 8 shows. It's not even showing any signs of plateauing. So I would encourage what like Chair McMahon said and what Leanne had pointed out is like you already start forming action plan 2. Because the actions you're taking now are only going to stave off the problem in 25. They're setting up for 26 budget, but you're going to be sitting here in about 6 more months with a bigger problem at the rate that thing's accelerating. From a capacity standpoint, we stand ready to take on. It's not going to affect us on capacity. It'll affect us on revenue, as Kevin knows. But from a capacity standpoint, the more people you can get to mainline services on all 3 of us, the better it is for the region.
Director Kotarek.
Thanks, Chairman. And I just wanted a couple observations and reflect some of the thoughts that were provided so far. This is a crisis. That's why we're all here, and everyone's putting their time and energy into it. And I think the upside of a crisis is that it really forces us to think differently about really big challenges. And this conversation, I think, is good, is that we're not really talking about cuts, but more about what do we want to keep. And we want to keep the RAP and TAP program. It's wildly successful. It's more convenient. It offers a service that, while not required, is still been a huge success, and people want to have it. So we're talking about how do you change it to make it work for the better. I think the second observation is, we've got to understand that the funding that could help us keep this program, we have to have everything on the table. And I think this concept of suburban bus money or city money or Collar County money is really a false dichotomy. Just like the program, if somebody picks it up in Batavia and they're going to Hinsdale, they're not going to get dropped off at the DuPage County line. Same thing with the suburban bus service. We don't run it to Milwaukee, and then when we get a 606 zip code, stop and ask everybody to walk the rest of the way. It's a regional system, and the funding shouldn't necessarily be thinking about coming from something else, but looking at these regional funding streams that we have, and the COVID relief one is Exhibit A. This body, well before many of us were here, distributed that funding to the service boards based on the best guess. Some of them were the old handshake political formulas that we used to distribute capital funding. That was 4 years ago. And so if we're a little sort of up in one service board, that funding is just as good to help keep this program in some modified way than any others. I don't think that this is something that, one thing I think that this ad hoc committee has been really good at, and we should continue, is to really not make this this is versus something else. We're all a network. Joe Service doesn't work if it doesn't connect with RICs or CTAs with Chairman Barclay. So, that regional concept, I think, also has to really force us to think about the regional pools of funding that we can use.
No, it's an excellent comment. One of the other things here that I think about is just in terms of, where's Dennis? Dennis understands this really well. All three service boards sort of have a different timing on when you're out of the federal relief monies. Pace your last, which is a good problem to have. And it shows good management or good stewardship. You have, on a percentage basis of your size, a real decent reserve, which also enters into my thought process on the equation. Director Carey. Great problem solver.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Director Katerek's comments about looking at it on a regional basis. There's two issues I really want to focus on, and one is it's a successful program, and it's incremental, as several people have mentioned. They're incremental rides, and it's convenient. But it is, where we sit here today, it is a program that I do not think we can afford to run. And I'm not suggesting we throw the program completely out, but I think we need to work aggressively to rein it in until we figure out better ways to determine who should be able to use this program. I mean, any of us, if I have to walk 2 blocks and get on a bus, or I can call an Uber for the same price, that's what you're going to do. And I totally understand we're talking about people that are eligible for ADA and they have disabilities, and it's a lot harder for them to get 2 blocks than it is for me. But I think we need to rein it in. So when you look at the mitigations for 2025 and proposed mitigations for 2026, it's a little more than a drop in the bucket, but it's still nowhere near covering the cost of the program. And as we said, while we have to fund traditional ADA off the top, and that affects the entire region because it comes right off the top, so it's money that isn't going to buses or Ls or trains, we aren't required to fund this type of program off the top. So I absolutely think we need to rein it in. I'd like to hear from PACE in a minute as to how soon they think they're going to do that. And are they willing to look at more aggressive changes going into 2026? And then I agree with Director Katarek that I think the COVID money's on the table. I was here when we divided it up, and it was. I mean, we didn't you know, is a bit of a crystal ball as to how to do it. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, that if one entity has more left at this point in time than the others, I think it's fair to put it on the table. So if Pace could tell me, you know, how soon are you going to make the changes you've been asked to make already, and how much more aggressive could you be in 2026?
Thank you, Director Corey. So we will bring back the public hearing comments to our board in August, which is next week. Once they get it, they will refer it over to you, and if it is approved, we will implement October 1. That's our goal, to implement pretty quickly with the fare increase. And then the other question is the 30 rides versus more rides than 30. I did want to just indicate a couple of things. One, TAP is included in the original RTA the RTA Act. When we took over paratransit for the entire region, one of the things that was said is that PACE will take over not only what's required by ADA, everything within 3/4 of a mile, but also the TAP program. And then RAP was implemented for equity in the suburbs. We had nothing going on in the suburbs. We had TAP since 2006. We had nothing going on in the suburbs. Again, based on that, our numbers are much lower in the suburbs using RAP than in the city. But we can do whatever the RTA, you know, directs us to do. This is really your program. You fund it, we operate it. You tell us who's certified, we let them ride. So we're happy to work with you, your staff, on developing what you would like us to operate. But in this case, basically, we are the operator for the region of ADA service. We're not the ones dictating what it's going to be. We need your guidance on that. And if you want us to cut this program back, we will cut it back. We do have to provide what is required under ADA law. But I also want to mention, just to keep this in everybody's head, one of the reasons why RAP was put in place so quickly was there are not enough drivers in the region to cover all the service needs that there are. There's a growing number of people who want to ride, who are ADA certified. What we saw was, coming out of COVID, the ADA riders came back much faster than our mainline riders. And so we had to develop something so there were no capacity constraints on the ADA portion. So these programs work hand in hand. One of the reasons why you have your RAP and TAP is to let people who can use those services use those services. It frees up our ADA services to do what it needs to do. So this is not just a simple, let's get rid of this and we're going to add here. There's not enough drivers on the ADA side. You need to have the RAP and TAP to kind of alleviate some of the, you know, the number of people who are riding and the growth that we're seeing and the people coming back. We've also noticed, an earlier question was, are we doing surveys? Are we looking at the riders, et cetera? We're looking at it every day. What we've noticed is people who are coming back to the system riding our RAP program are people who lapsed on the ADA certification, and now they're starting to come back. So, you know, we saw a great number of people who were lapsed and now they're coming back, but they're not coming back to the ADA paratransit side. They're coming back to the RAP side.
One follow-up question. So do you know the rapid increase? You said TAP has been in since 2006, 2007. But you just added RAP 18 months ago. So are most of those rides then under RAP as opposed to TAP? Increased incremental rides?
The city of Chicago growth has been on the RAP side of the house. There's limited number of taxis now that, you know, the taxi industry has kind of been devastated after COVID. So there are more limited rides on taxis, and we're seeing the growth in TAP has remained relatively stable, maybe down a tiny little bit, but the growth is on the RAP side of the house.
Both in the suburbs and the city?
Well, there was no RAP in the suburbs, so there is growth in the suburbs, but again, that's about 20%, if even 20% of the the RAP growth. It's probably under that in the suburbs. 80% is in the city. That's correct. There's no tap in the suburbs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Director Canning, do you have anything, Chris? What are your thoughts? I mean, I'm hearing from your leaders, but your board itself, what are your thoughts? You got anything to add here that we're missing?
So, the PACE board is made up of a bunch of things, and they're trying to solve problems. And we're trying to solve this problem with your direction, with our staff. I listened to the end about information you talked about that your board might have seen earlier about the survey potentially used. That would be wonderful information for us to have in our board, be shared with us. This growth is the RAP program and PAP program, which on your slide. Some of that has to be related to getting certified, keeping them certified. How has that changed? This is all information that we as board members have. And, you get to the more information, better, more guidance. That is what I think our board wants. And I think what's really interesting about our board is how well we work together between this county and our counties. Because we have worked together regionally. Understand that yes, this is something that we all have participated, whether you're out in the country or whether you're not. But if you give that enough information, you're going to make the right decision. So we're not there yet.
Just a reminder to please turn your mics on.
It's not for
professor
the
called
room, it's
on
for anyone,
Director
but to
Canning.
also the recording and anyone who's listening in.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, Director Yoder.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, were you, all done with it? Yeah, all good. Yeah. Thanks. Kind of going back to Chairman Kwasniewski's, starting this by saying that, we're willing to do what we need to do. And if we want to call it a loan, we all understand how budgets work. And, on the surface of definition of that in a multi-year program, it obviously can get worked out. But just, what I feel, the discussions have really kind of been very supportive of Chairman, you just, first and foremost, laying that on the line to say that's kind of where we want to start as the PACE, and then for the other service boards, President Learson to say, look, there's more to this that we've got to figure out. And we need CTA to be a part of that solution, that this isn't coming across by anyone. Metro saying the same thing, that, look, we stand ready to figure out how all of us own this. And I think that's the message the public wants to hear. This cannot be a PACE problem. It can't be an RTA, working with PACE problem. There is more in this data, that the willingness of everyone to wanting to look into that, I think really sets us up in a great place. So if it's quote a loan, I think, we're halfway there right now to say we can move forward to figure this out, but it cannot be, again, just a few of us trying to figure this out, a few of the service boards picking this up. It has to be everybody. And again, whatever the future of, this board might look like down the road, this is a commitment we have to make to keep, is that willingness to say today it's a loan that we're going to have to figure out how all of us would pay that back. So I'm very heartened with the conversation. I think we can get there, and just thanks, everyone for being here to put all that on the table. Thanks, Chairman.
No, thank you, Director.
Chairman, Director Ross has a
Yes.
question or comment.
JD, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo Director Yonen's comments 100%. At the last committee meeting, I don't remember if it was Director Kotarik or Director Montero who talked about the importance of us collaborating as a show, I guess, of collaboration with the legislature as we try to move forward to resolve these issues. And I believe a loan does that. In fact, it does two things, in my opinion. One is it shows cooperation from PACE with the rest of the region. It shows the legislature that we're cooperating, but I think it also protects the autonomy, if you will, of a service board to make decisions that reflect what they believe to be the needs of their riders. And that's something that we've tended to do on this board, at least since I've been on it. So I think a loan for 2025 achieves that purpose. Going forward, I think all the things that we've heard today, everything should be on the table. Obviously, some tough decisions will have to be made. Um, During my entire professional career, I've always been an advocate for people with disabilities. It's been part of my job in both of my careers, as a matter of fact. So I understand the importance of maintaining accessibility, but there are also fiscal constraints that we just have to address. So for me, for 2025, a loan is an approach to take. In 2026, I'm open to anything that anyone wants to put on the table. I think we have to be. Thank you.
Thank you. So just so I'm clear, Director Ross, I mean, we have a couple of, we have 17 million coming from the RTA sales taxes. We have a couple of other, there's an existing reserve fund. Are you talking about a loan after we fill as many of the holes as we can?
I think that's even open for discussion as long as it's a loan.
The only thing that worries me about a loan is I just don't know what the legislature is going to do. That's my only worry about a loan. Leanne, what's your thought?
So just want to clarify a couple of things to sort of around some of the conversation and the good discussion that's occurring. What we've shared from a staff recommendation standpoint was kind of I look at it as almost like a baseline of what we think can kind of get us through the statutory steps that we have to get through in the coming month to get all three operators their financial estimated revenues so they can do their 2026 budgeting, right? So we have to deal with 25 and we have to deal with 26 with this ADA gap, for want of a better term. And so while I think the conversation around additional and more aggressive or future steps and actions is great and important, we intend for the RTA board next week to actually give you kind of a more comprehensive update on the ADA action plan, both from a financial and from an operational standpoint, to have more full discussion about, I think to the point about what else can be done for 26 and beyond. But what we're trying to get through is kind of, we don't need, 26 remains a moving target if we don't sort of settle what we're doing in 25. And so it becomes impossible to set up 26, aggressive or not, without having that baseline of 25. So I know it sounds kind of tedious and it sounds bureaucratic, but we've also got these statutory obligations by September 15th. If the RTA board doesn't pass the funding mark allocation for each service board, we're in violation of state statute. So I know it sounds kind of annoying and bureaucratic, but that's legally what we have to get done, which is sort of the work that we're trying to get through. And that's not to say that we don't want to continue bigger and broader policy conversations going forward. We're just trying to sort of take some of these steps and address them now. In terms of a loan, I think staff could work out and continue to talk about details about that. In the past, when the ADA side of things was in surplus, we created a fund, and that had been used, as we did last year, to close out the gap for 24, because this gap is not new. We had a similar gap in 24, we're having it in 25, and we're projecting it into 26. So we utilize that surplus to sort of pay back, if you will, and maybe it would be a similar type of structure that we could set up but again, to your point about the legislature and funding for the future, I would love to mobilize, sort of a sidebar to all this conversation, but mobilize the advocates and people in the community that are very directly potentially impacted by changes in these programs, to mobilize them to say to the state legislature, hey, you're only funding less than 4% of this program. How can we actually get additional monies so we're not stuck in this challenge 26, 27 and beyond? So I think that there's things that we can do collectively on the programmatic side, as well as sort of future and external to us funding side of things as well. So that's sort of just a sidebar that I just think is important to remind people of. So I think that we can continue that conversation. I don't know that there's a loan, but how's it paid back? That's really the big question. And the reason why we're having this conversation is because the RTA doesn't have the money to fund the shortfall in the first place. We've expended the shortfall, the reserve fund, that we had to support it to date. I think the challenge additionally a nuance to just keep reminding people of, when we say off the top, I think sometimes we throw those words around quite a bit. What it means is it's less money to CTA, less money to Metra, and less money to PACE for their mainline services. And what that does in the context of the broader fiscal cliff conversation is push all that up sooner. And that's, then that becomes the real question that we have to then additionally tackle ADA and the cliff for 26. And so that's the quandary that we're in. And I think that, and we've identified where we see monies available, where we see, and as the chairman noted, RTA is putting, its share of the sales tax on the table. We're looking at taking the remainder of the reserve fund for 25 to fill the gap, and that leaves the 19.3, I think the number was, yes, gap that is the item in question. And, I think, as noted, PACE does have some surplus funds that could be utilized to address the 25 and possibly even 26 as we look forward, again, with parallel conversations. But this, I think it's to just keep thinking about it as this is at least the baseline, so we can get through the key next steps and we can continue to work on, with more board input, on what the future looks like 26 and beyond.
Director Mondero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of add on to what Executive Director Redden said, I'm really concerned about when the fiscal cliffs are happening. And so something like a loan is not going to address that in any way. The discussion of shared sacrifice that Director Carey brought up, this is painful to all of us. Looking at slide 10, if RTA board members remember, my recommendation 2 meetings ago was that, hey, if RTA, if PACE has such a big surplus, can they absorb that, just so that we could have all riders not go through any fiscal cliff, and that we could buy enough time for the legislature to get a deal done. And then we wanted make sure that we'll get funding for CTA, Metra, and PACE long-term for all of us, so that no one's daily lives are impacted, right? And so this compromise on slide 10, I'm not happy with. I think that a lot of paratransit riders who use Rap and Tap are not going to be happy with us and with the recommendations that we're saying as well in terms of the future of the program. But alone still doesn't address in any way the disparity that CTA, at least until we receive the new marks that Kevin will provide us on sales tax revenue. CTA is fiscal cliff is first quarter, maybe going into second quarter, I think, with the new retail sales tax money, but PACE is still into 2027, right? And so that's the big concern, that the whole public is going to be on everyone in this room about, like, what the heck are you doing about the fiscal cliff and impacting that? And I just want to make sure that we center our decisions on how do we avoid that fiscal cliff from happening? How do we give the legislature enough time to like get a deal done? And a deal that's fair and equitable for the whole region. So.
Dr. Curry.
I'm not in favor of a loan for reasons as explained by Director Mondero, but also it just feels like it's kicking the can down the road. We've had a significant shortfall in 2024. We have a larger shortfall in 2025 and an even larger shortfall projected for 2026. So I'm not sure what a loan really, where it gets us. And how it would be paid back in the future. And so, you know, I'll go on record as saying I support staff's recommendation for 25 and 26 as presented, noting that in 26, if the mitigating actions are increased above and beyond what you're going to do fourth quarter this year, that would, you know, that would decrease the shortfall, obviously, that would fall on PACE funding.
Dr. Gorman.
Thank you, Chairman Dillard. You know, there's obviously with the back and forth. So, you know, the success of this program, it's actually, you know, with the dramatic increase, it seems like this is a good problem. It's a successful program. And the more resources with anything, you know, obviously the more use it's needed. But I think it was, you know, Nora that was saying it's a good story, you know, and what is the story? Director Barclay was talking about the more needs for this program. It's accessible. So obviously more people are coming to the city, you know, from suburbs into, you know, whatever medical, you know, centers they need to get to. and it's an improved accessibility, great conditions, and is it a safety feature? You know, people are probably, you know, using this RAP tap for safety reasons. But, you know, it's the regional discussion, you know, that we need to have this discussion, which we obviously are, but we need to capitalize on the success of this program. And what are the successes? And what's that revenue will look like? But with this, I guess, which brings me to the question, with this 30 ride cap that we're looking at, so that's $3.25. What would an actual ride be? And I mean, I know that's a pretty difficult question depending on where it's coming from and going to. So what would that average ride be?
For the city, the average ride is about $25. For the suburbs, it's about 20.
So it's a pretty big subsidy.
It's a big subsidy, but remember, it's less than what it would cost to ride on traditional ADA service. That's why this is so appealing, that this is if people choose to use it, it's a lot less expensive than riding traditional ADA. If we shift them back to traditional ADA, that side of the house the expense will go up.
Director Koterik. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you finished?
Yeah.
Director Gorman.
Yeah.
Thanks, Director Gorman. I think one fundamental thing that we all agree is we want to make the existing fixed route system more accessible. Really, that's all our jobs. And I think part of the aggressive plan 2.0, I think that Jim had mentioned and Director Carey talked about, I think that's got to be part of this, is really figuring out who's using the system and why is the fixed route system not working, and making specific investments to make that work. A comment on the loan, I also have a lot of reservations about a loan. If you're coming to the RTA for a loan, I don't know if we're the best bank, given where we're at these days. And I think we owe it to the public, again, to have radical transparency about what we're going through in this fiscal cliff environment. It's part of the purpose of this working group. And we have to look at all of the funds that are available to continue the program in the shape and form that we can. I think that's still unanswered about what that looks like. But again, you know, this COVID funding I keep coming back to, when that's deposited into, you know, the bank, that accrues interest, doesn't it? I mean, so there's been interest on COVID funds that haven't been used. which is an advantage that some of the service boards have over others because of a decision 4 years ago to make your best projection about what might keep everybody going. This wasn't, again, this didn't come from, tablets from Mount Sinai. This was the best guess. And so thinking about this is like, this is, funding just for one service board. The COVID funding was to keep the regional system alive. And that didn't preclude using it for ADA and other programs that are very successful. So I think we've got to have everything on the table before we consider a loan that honestly, I don't know how we would handle a loan when we're staring a pretty stark, scenario. We're all talking about cutting 40% of service. I just don't see how a loan could work. I think that we all probably have a lot of interest in working to make sure that PACE doesn't have severe cuts. I think we all share that. And I think you've got the commitment of everybody here to make sure that the service is protected and excellent across the board for all of your services. But I just think that a loan doesn't necessarily do that in this current fiscal environment.
I'm just going to take one point of personal privilege, which is always to remind the public that Chicago has handled the federal COVID relief money probably better than any other metropolitan area in the United States. We still have money left, which is all your credit in the way you've operated your different service boards. So, we've handled this money very well, but, D-Day is coming. But there's a nice letter today from the Virginia, our counterparts in Virginia, on our system in Chicago, how good it is, how well it's been run, which I encourage all of you to read. In fact, I'm going to tweet her out later on this afternoon, but it's from, one of our fellow operators nationally, including commending the way that CTA, Metra, and PACE have operated. That our problem is really not an operating problem. It's just a severe underfunding by the state of Illinois for so long. And so, Belinda, on the loan.
Thank
or
you.
whatever.
Appreciate it, Chairman Dillard. Couple of comments. One is when we drew down our COVID relief money, we told the federal government what we're going to spend it on. If we change that, I'm not sure they're going to allow it. I don't know what's going to happen. You are correct. We took that money, we did it that way so that we could invest it and get more funding for the region. Our goal was to get more funding for suburban transit. Why suburban transit? Why are we pulling that apart? Because historically, suburban transit has been underfunded. We don't have enough service out there. We know that. That's why we're going through our revision program, and we want to put more service out there. Along with putting more service out there will be the ADA component of it. So that's going to also increase the ADA side of what we do in the suburbs. Why we're saying alone is we were very efficiently trying to hold back our funds for our rainy day and use that funding to support suburban service. We have our revision plan. We know where we need to put in more suburban service. And if that money comes out of our pocket, that means putting less service out when the region is ready to move forward. I will also say, putting this on the backs of PACE, we're a flea on an elephant. Whatever money you get out of the PACE program will support CTA for a couple of weeks. So you really have to look at this in a regional context. We're trying to get more service out there for the suburbs where we say alone, you want to take money that PACE has very diligently, our board has very diligently told us, you save that money to put more service in the suburbs. We're saying we will trust this board that if they say they need the money, we trust you and we will give you the money. And what you're saying is, well, we're not sure what the legislators are going to do. We're trusting the legislators will do the right thing also. We believe there will be more funding for transit because the opposite approach is devastating. There's got to be more money for transit. And so we believe that money will be coming. At that point, we're suggesting you give us the money back that we have stepped forward and given to the region. That's our suggestion. I also just wanted to point out on the slide, as we get into 2026, it's on one of the future slides, I think it's about 11 million that is there for RAP and TAP. That won't cover the program. So 2026, there's going to be some 11, 13 million, I can't remember, I don't have it right in front of me, but that will not cover the RAP and TAP program. So there's going to have to be more discussion on that also.
That's true.
May I offer
Please, go ahead.
an additional solution, perhaps, to address 2025? We touched on it. We talked about it in the context of the 2026 gap of using future ICE monies. Now, ICE is I know it has different connotations these days sometimes, but it's Innovation Coordination and Enhancement Program. It is at RTA's discretion to allocate that, and we do that each year, basically. We have allocated it. We noted this, but just to bring it back into the conversation, we have allocated that for the 2025 year. But to date, the service boards have not expended any of those dollars. Now, they might have ideas for those dollars, but they have not expended those dollars. It's just essentially sitting there. Those monies have not been drawn down. So another suggestion that we could, as a RTA board, could basically rescind those grants that have been made, no dollars have been expended, and use that to additionally put in as a one-time fill for 2025. And so that would bring the number down. It's about 17.3, right? Yes. So that would take the PACE gap down to 2.1. It doesn't address 26, and it actually, in a way, we could put that money in 25, or we could put that money in 26. So it's sort of just moving it's like that shell game, right? You're moving the monies around into different pots. But it is real money that could be put into the mix. So we could put it into 25. The concept then, PACE would fund the 2.1, fill that gap, and then we move forward, and then we work on, we try to settle on a baseline for 26, again, acknowledging that and our board's going to talk about this in more detail. And just for clarification, the analysis that staff have done and that we presented before we did the action plan several months back, all that information has been shared with the EDs and with and PACE as well. So we'll continue to share that information, but that could be something for discussion now.
Director Groven.
I didn't know if that was intended. I didn't get a microphone today, so maybe I'm not supposed to be talking. What I'm really going to do is kind of echo, I think, what's some key points today. I like where Leanne is headed with, looking for all potential options. And but I think the two things I liked best of what I heard today was, can we drive towards more self-reliance of this process and aggressive? I think Pat's point, we're talking about a lot of funding options. We certainly don't want to cut this process. This seems to be a very popular, with good reason, program. But what can we do? I think aggressively, to me, is aggressively looking at the numbers that say, what's that tipping point? How much can we do things like increase the fare before we see a real kind of damage to the use of this process? And that's something like that might bring in another 5 or 10 or $15 million. And then something like a portion of ICE, I think we could, close that gap. But I think it's really important that we look at the base cause, what's driving the gap, and access that and address that. And so the kind of aggressive self-reliance, obviously keeping in mind that we're helping a lot of people there, and how do we not undercut that is really, really important.
If we do the ICE, eventually, hopefully, Nora and Jim and Melinda get whatever is in that ICE program. Bad acronym these days, Mr. State's Attorney. So you push that off for a year. So
well, no, we'd have to get agreement. I mean, we'd have to rescind those grants across the 3 operators that have already been sort of as part of the 25 budget approval, and sort of pull and say we're not going to actually honor those obligations. So then to some extent, the RTA, it would takes RTA action, and the hope would be that the three boards would be like, okay, that's fine, we can do that for 25. The conversation, we've put it in the mix and for 26, because it's an annual program.
Right.
And that conversation has occurred, and we alluded to that. We noted that in Kevin's summary earlier. For 26 going forward, for 26, there was essentially, I think, general consensus that that was a line item that could be allocated for 26. I'm suggesting that we sort of pull back on and rescind the 25 allocation and put it in the mix for 25. For discussion. That was not staff's initial recommendation. I'm just saying if we are looking under all the rocks and sort of couch cushions, then that is something that could be considered.
Carrie?
I just want to clarify, Leanne, so there's 34 million in ICE. That's 2 years.
2 years.
Okay, so you're suggesting 17 million be used to reduce the gap for 2025. And then can you clarify then what you're talking about on 2026? Because we're also trying to get agreement on that here today.
Correct. And the assumption that we have worked in staff's recommendation for 26 is to include it, instead of, as part of the 2026 budget process, not allocating it to individual service boards,
Okay.
keeping it in the mix and using that line item to fund ADA.
And that's in this
That we
presentation.
factored, we ended up factoring that into the 2026 proposal
Okay, so it's already in here, in this
for 26.
26. Okay, fine. So there's 17 million in 26 with 34. So if you put all 34 in 26, you have to pull 17 out, put it back in.
Yeah, we'd have to, either way, that would require essentially rescinding the 25 amount of 17.3-ish.
Right.
And the conversation is, where do you want to allocate it? If you want to rescind it back and cancel those grants, essentially, do you want to put it in 25 and address the 25, bringing Pace's number down to the 2.1, or do you want to move it all into 26? Your discussion.
It doesn't.
It doesn't,
make a lot of
none
differences.
of these things solve the ultimate problem, which is why the programmatic
Yeah.
improvements and changes have to occur, which is part of the conversation that we've already kind of started. Pace has already noted that they're working on, factoring in the two early mitigations, which we're estimating to wrap out, to close out 25 would result in about a $7.9 million reduction in the shortfall, cost savings, basically. And then additional savings and revenues, including like a fair increase for discussion for 26. We're just trying to get through both 25 and then the baseline for 26 so we can continue the actual budget work. Because remember, what we're trying to do for Marks is just define what the revenues, the expected revenues, the inputs into the three operators, so then they can come back and work on their expenses side, which is why that parallel conversation and additional programmatic changes can continue to happen. That conversation can continue to happen over the coming months
And
as part of the budget work.
yeah, just to clarify, I'm sorry, just to clarify that 26, so as we move forward in the conversation, if we move to the funding marks, these ICE funding, as it's going to be presented, it's allocated to CTA, the 26. Yep, and
It's accounted for, but yes, sorry, I
yeah,
just
no,
went there.
well,
Okay, you've.
Because
confused-
in 26, we have the sort of the dueling problems of both the ADA as well as
as well. Okay, I
CTA,
got it, I got
and
it,
then following behind that, Metra hitting
left,
the cliff
yep,
as well.
yep.
So we're trying to
Okay,
close the gaps, if you will.
all right.
and
Sorry,
yeah,
my error.
As far as rescinding the grants, I mean, if there's general consensus, which I think you said that that's been discussed with the service boards, I'm fine with if we want to put that in 2025. I don't.
Well, that clearly impacts, we use that money for our security systems, cameras. Security, as you know, is a big issue in the city, CTA. I don't know if the full use of those funds, not having those available to improve security in our camera system is going to be helpful to us overall.
So some of your ICE funding is for security.
Just to clarify, because I did misspeak, that for 26, we are proposing that the entire region's amount of ICE monies go to CTA. Sorry, yeah, just to re-clarify. Thank you, Kevin.
Chairman McMahon.
Thank you. Just really a quick question. If you do rescind those grants, Leanne, how does that help kind of align the uniformity of the fiscal cliff? Because that's one of the issue that I think has been raised. It's not really clear to me how much that helps or does that help? But if you could answer that.
Yeah,
best
I
you
think-
can, sorry.
When we get into, again, when we get into we haven't got into the full conversation around the 2026 marks, we still have to talk through that, is next. So maybe if we can table that question till we get to that part of the conversation. But I will say we don't necessarily have a totally full picture on that because we're just sort of identifying one side of the ledger, if you will, the revenues, and then to really identify where the cliff hits and sort of those final numbers around each service board individual and collective as a region doesn't come until you guys take those expected revenues, look at what your planned expenses will be and your operating budgets for 26. So until we see that, we don't have a full picture of when and what that respective and collective cliff looks like. Does that
But,
make sense?
Well, what are the total numbers, if you add up these discretionary grants, the innovation, coordination, and enhancement funding, what are those gross dollar amounts for 25 and 26?
It's 34.
34 million.
34 million.
And it's not a huge amount of money, but again, I think in the interest, what we've been trying to do is identify where are the sources that have more flexibility that can be moved around, separate to, in addition to, I mean, as Chairman Kotarik and several others have noted, there are additional things, but they are more complex in nature to talk about how we might reallocate those, if that's the consensus of the board.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe if will it be helpful to move on and talk about the actual totality of the 26 marks? Because these are all puzzle pieces that come together and it gives you a bit more of a fuller picture. So that might be helpful. Sorry,
Yeah,
Do that.
that'll work.
I just have to be.
I know you have to leave.
Yes.
And I will, I heard you loud and clear on the ICE safety monies, so I'll
Thank
be
you.
on that. Okay. Thanks, Lester, very much, as always.
Go ahead, Bill. Good morning. So, I'm going to provide some context for the 2026 operating marks. Next slide, please. Setting the marks is a critical step in the RTA's regional annual budget process. Next week, we plan to present to the RTA board a proposed ordinance to adopt the operations and capital funding amounts, or what we refer to as the marks, for the 2026 budget, the 2027-2028 financial plan, and the 2026 through 2030 5-year capital program. As Leanne has mentioned, the RTA Act establishes September 15th as the date by which the funding amounts for the upcoming year must be adopted. That is the RTA statute. However, action at the August board meeting, rather than the September one, will provide the amounts to the service boards 3 weeks earlier in the development of their budgets. And this year, those are 2 budgets each. The RTA Act further requires that the service boards develop their budgets consistent with the RTA funding amounts. These funding amounts will be supplemented by the remaining federal COVID relief funding. Next slide, please. So, the largest component of RTA operations funding is the RTA sales tax.
Therefore, we are closely watching the impact of the extension of the RTA sales tax to more online transactions. As you know, there's been some reporting in the media regarding this topic and speculation about how it impacts the impending fiscal cliff. This chart shows in orange the estimated impact of the change in the sales tax base above what we would consider normal growth, which is depicted in black. The January and February results, or the January and February sales tax results, suggested approximately a $10 million monthly increase as a result of the extension of the base, while the March and April results indicate a monthly impact closer to $20 million a month. The just received May results indicate something in between, around $12 million. So this is the assumption that we have incorporated in the marks that we'll present today. Please keep in mind that this is a one-time or one-year upward shift in the sales tax results from the expansion of the sales tax. While the shift is expected to continue through December, beginning in January 2026, the sales tax growth will again reflect only changes in regional economic activity. To provide some further context on the marks, let's revisit the variables of the previously projected $771 million 2026 shortfall. As delighted as we are with the sales tax growth, it does not by any means solve the fiscal cliff problem. However, it will help delay its onset and may also have some effect on the magnitude of the fiscal cliff. The component of the $771 million shortfall that the 2026 marks assumption will impact is the $2.6 billion of existing funding shown here in black at the bottom of the stack. You'll see in the next slides that these funding projections have improved, and all else being equal would decrease the magnitude of the 2026 unfunded cliff shown in white, the familiar $771 million. But other variables, especially service board expenses, have also continued to increase. Thus, we cannot accurately forecast the timing and magnitude of the cliff until after the funding levels are approved and the RTA receives the proposed service board budgets in October. Regardless of the timing, we still fully expect a structural shortfall of approximately 20% of the operating budget due to insufficient system-generated operating revenue resulting from the fundamental changes brought on by the COVID pandemic. And keep in mind that it is only after the service boards begin to exhaust their reserves in 2026 that a truer picture of the magnitude of the fiscal cliff will emerge in 2027. If there are no questions, I'll turn this back to Kevin to cover the marks assumptions. Thank you.
So again, we're going to run through the rest of the deck here, but we're definitely happy to see the increase in sales tax. But I want to be clear, we want to be clear that the message out there is that this is not going to resolve the cliff, and it's not addressing the structural underfunding of transit here in Chicago. So while it is good news, it is helping. It's helping us do some things here so that we can give the legislature more time to act. It doesn't necessarily fix it. So again, just want to preface it by that. So as Bill mentioned, I'll now review the underlying assumptions of the proposed marks. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So Moody's Analytics provides the RTA with a custom sales tax forecast for the current year. So that's 2025. And the budget plan years 26 and 28, based on historical tax receipts and projected regional economic performance. The most recent Moody's forecast did not reflect the expansion of the RTA sales tax, so we're doing a few things a little different. That's what's shown on this slide. So to project the sales tax receipts from 2026 through 2028, we first updated our estimate for 2025, and that's what you see there as the resetting the 2025 base, which was our first step. So as I mentioned previously, we have actual sales tax results for the first 4 months of the year. Thereafter, we assume a 1.6% underlying growth rate forecasted by Moody's, and then we top that with $12 million in additional sales tax resulting from the expansion of the sales tax base. So this resulted in overall 2025 sales tax growth of 11% as we compare to 2024 actuals. I'm going to take a quick break here to mention we did meet with the Illinois Department of Revenue as well as Cook County to go through some of these numbers, and they're seeing the same sort of the same information that we're seeing and forecasting similar with the similar factors as well. So that's to say, the impact that we're seeing on sales tax growth is directly related to the change in law rather than more economic activity statewide or region-wide. So that's why we want to make sure that we're conservative in how we forecast the future 2026 and 2027, 28 plan years as well. So we took a similar approach with the real estate transfer tax or RET. We use the actual receipts during the first 6 months of the year, followed by 10% growth for each remaining month on trend for what we have seen during the first half of the year. So again, this resulted in a 2025 RET growth of 10.9% compared to 2024 actuals. As for 2026 through 2028 sales tax projections, at that, once we reset 2025 base, we apply Moody's forecast of 3% for 2026, 2.5% for 2027, and 2% for 2028 to the adjusted 2025 base. For 2026 through 2028 RET projections, we applied the annual growth of 3% in 2026, 5%, 27, and 28. And again, as mentioned earlier, the allocations of sales tax to PTF2 for ADA paratransit is set to the 2026 plan level. So that's at 268, and that was adopted by the RTA board during the 2025 budget process. Debt service covers existing bonds only, including the one that we issued this year. So again, clarifying a lot of percentages, a lot of numbers that we threw at you with this forecast, but to summarize it, we upped 2025, we applied Moody's recommendations of sales tax growth to 2026 of 3%, and then you see the percentages for 27, 28. I do want to highlight here that they did provide a recession scenario, which again, we're not recommending at this time, but we do have those numbers as well. And in the back of our minds, especially given the macroeconomic situation that we have right now, that's a factor that we are hedging against as we continue to forecast these numbers. And as to repeat some of the advice from the Illinois Department of Revenue, the more data we have, the better. Unfortunately, we only have 5 months of data on sales tax growth and what the impact of the change in law is going to be for 2026. But that's the data that we have, and that's what we can forecast at this time. So if we move to the next slide, please. So we're proposing one set of marks, of funding marks. And again, as we're presenting them here, this is all based on staff recommendations on 2025 ADA and 2026 ADA, but we want to provide a full picture of these. So although the RTA is requesting 2 budget scenarios from the service board, the RTA intends to adopt only one set of marks for the service boards. That is marks corresponding to budget scenario 1, because that's what we know. There's no new funding. And that's the RTA Act that we have to follow. There's not seen any changes. So that's what we have, and that's what we have to adhere to. For the 2026 marks only, CTA will receive all non-statutory funding. So that's a total of $74 million that's shifted to CTA. This amount includes PACE's 2% share of PTF1, that's about 7.3 million. Metro and PACE's shares of residual sales tax, that's 42.3 million and 14.1 million respectively. And then also Metro and PACE's shares of innovation coordination and enhancement funding. And that's the 6.8 million plus the 2.3 million plus CTA's portion of that. So again, as we're presenting these, that's what's included in here. So shifting funding here will change everything that you'll see, that you would see if there is consensus there. So these measures, this is some of the reasoning why we're proposing this. It postpones CTA's fiscal cliff, which right now is forecasted to hit it first. So that's projected to occur earlier again than PACE and Metro at this time. So the market assumed that in 2027 and 2028, the non-statutory allocations return to traditional distributions. So 98% CTA, 2% PACE, PTF1, and then 48, 39, 13 sales tax 1 and innovation coordination and enhancement funding. On the other hand, funding ADA paratransit at previous plan levels discussed earlier, it preserves that 45 million of sales tax 2 and funding for mainline services. Again, that split of 48, 39, 13. Again, note that if the state provides additional funding, the board can redistribute this non-statutory funding by amending the 2026 mark. So again, technicality there, but there's an option for the board to do something if there is funding that the state identifies prior to the budget need to be approved. So after you take all of that into consideration, if we go to the next slide, you'll see the result of all of that. So you put all the ingredients into the recipe, if you will, and this is what you come out with. So as it is proposed right now, you'll see a plus 206 change to CTA, and then you see the point of this, the main point that I want to drive here is that while that shifting is happening, the other service boards do not see a decrease in funding as it was planned in 2026. So if anything, you see that as an increase, and that's thanks to the increase in sales tax that we have seen. It enables us to do exactly this. Even though at a smaller scale, you'll see the RTA agency's budget staying not on track with what was planned in 2026. It goes down by 1.2 million. So that funding remains flat as compared to 2025. And then you see kind of the other lines on that. Let me catch up with my notes here. So on this slide, again, we want to highlight that if there's any shifting of funds, this would change, this allocation will change. And so that's one of the reasons why we are looking for that guidance. And the change would mostly be on that first top line CTA allocation. Because again, we want to see, we realize that they're hitting the cliff first. So we want to make sure that the impact on the riders can get delayed as much as we can to give the legislature time so that by then, hopefully we have identified funding. So if we go to the next slide, please. So even with the shifting of these funds, again, taking the previous slide and out of the presentation or out of context can lead to people believing, well, the cliff was addressed, but that is not the case. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that we point these out. The cliff is still happening in 2026. CTA is the largest agency, the largest operating budget or the largest budget within the region. So they would hit with this moving of funds, we see CTA cliff moving to mid-2026, so the end of Q2 of 2026. Metro mid to late 2026, and then you see PACE 2027. These, as it's included or as highlighted on this slide, this is, and as Leanne mentioned, this is only looking at the revenue side. We don't have 2020, the expense levels for 2026, so we can't really tell you this is final concrete information. We gotta wait on that spending, on their spending levels. So this is looking at the revenue only. The final cliff amount, if you will come out through the budget process when we get the spending levels from the service boards. If we can go to the next slide, we're gonna cover recovery ratios. On this slide, the marks set the recovery ratio for each of the service boards as the RTA Act is right now. Since budget scenario 1 assumes no recovery ratio relief from Springfield, the 2026 marks will require a return to the pre-COVID recovery ratio requirement of 54.75% for CTA, 52.5% for Metra, and then 30.3% for PACE. And that's again 26 through 2028. Without recovery ratio relief, COVID relief funding reserves are longer authorized to be included as operating revenue for recovery ratio purposes. Instead, the service board's budgets will need to include a generic, so you'll see a very generic revenue credit to reach that recovery ratio mark. So that's a credit on paper only. So we want to make sure that we clarify that it's not additional funding that we're getting or anything like that. It's only to meet the RTA Act requirement. So we would be effectively self-disclosing our anticipated inability to meet the 50% recovery ratio requirement. This credit also represents the potential PTF penalty that could be imposed on service boards if the 50% recovery ratio is not met. So it's a large amount, upwards of $600 million, that would completely wipe out the sales tax growth that we have seen 3 times over. So a little background on the recovery ratio penalty. If the regional recovery ratio is not met, then each service board that didn't meet its recovery ratio is penalized the following year. So on top of dealing with a full fiscal cliff in 2027, you would add the recovery ratio penalties. So if this budget process is tough, imagine what that would look like. The penalty is equivalent to the amount of additional revenue the service board would have required to meet its 2025 recovery ratio requirement. And then the penalty amount in the form of PTF or public transportation funding must be returned to the state. The service boards is also required to amend its following year budget to reflect the loss of this funding. In 2026, the ADA paratransit recovery ratio requirement returns to pre-COVID levels of 10%. Again, unlike budget scenario 1 and budget scenario 2, with the step-up funding assumes the recovery ratio relief as well included in there. So again, this completes the presentation from the ADA funding 2025 to the 2026 funding marks to put more things into perspective. I know that I put a lot of numbers out there, but at this time we'll open up for questions, comments, and a reminder, we still haven't resolved 2025 ADA.
Thanks, Kevin and Bill. Questions, comments?
Just one little minor clarification. We don't, this group doesn't have to actually resolve, the RTA board has to resolve 2025 and then set the marks, but it's, I mean, consensus or input from the group, so board members can kind of decide what you want to do.
You know, and it gives
Thank
you an ability to sort of see where we're at. I do have one question, Kevin and Bill. Inflation. How should I sit here and just think about, you know, for my first several years here, we really haven't had inflation, but we've had inflation. And this goes to the service boards. You know, you got to be thinking about what your inflationary numbers may be, especially on the capital side, but on the operating side as well. You know, how should I view, Kevin or Bill, inflation? Granted, we're getting more sales tax revenues, but I think some of the sales tax revenue growth is based upon the fact that we still have to spend money as families and people, and there is inflation built into that number. And we got to deal with inflation on the expense side.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see that. I'm going to let the service boards talk a little bit more about that, but we are seeing in some line items that are as much as 15% inflationary increases that, again, we're glad to see that on the revenue side increase, but on the expense side, wages and benefits, so salaries and benefits, seeing a large increase there, especially on the benefit side, insurance, health insurance, and a few other line items that I know from our CFO conversations have come to, we have discussed as well, but service boards definitely have a lot more on that.
And insurance is a massive pressure these days, especially in the private sector.
Chairman, I'll touch inflation. Obviously, we monitor this all the time. You brought up insurance, brought up, but 66% of all of our fixed costs is labor. And, a lot of that's unionized labor, which actually is in contract. So that's kind of baked into it. Where we do, obviously, volatility is going to be in components. And like you pointed out, some of the services. So it's, I guess if you want to look at it, it's about a third of the overall budgets that we have to really, really keep an eye on. And a portion of that definitely could be inflationary affected. One of the things I just wanted to, as a comment, and I'm sure everybody's aware of this, whatever happens with regard to a solution of any type that requires the legislator to act in new revenues, we have to probably all understand that the Department of Revenue doesn't turn a light switch on one day and everything's flowing in. So as much as we've put forth this map that gets us to this fiscal cliff, the cliff could actually be a different place than we recognize because of the Department of Revenue. I just think something we all have to continue to advocate for as we, look for a solution. That without a solution sooner than later, the cliff's actually almost unavoidable at some point in time.
No, absolutely.
From PACE's perspective, we have the same situation. The major portion, 66% of our labor, our costs are in labor also. We look at about a 5% mark, but what I will caution is that we have parts prices that are going up dramatically that we haven't seen in the past. Insurance, things like that, we're seeing larger increases than 5%. So we're monitoring it. We're trying to offset it the best we can. But that's really what's going on. The parts and the insurance are going up much higher than 5%.
We all have similar circumstances. Labor is 2/3 of our budget at CTA, and costs are going up, and that inflationary cost is included in our budget to reflect increased costs in healthcare and labor across the board.
And you all get the same questions I do, from Crane. I had started with Cranes that you have all this new sales tax money, to which I say it doesn't nearly close the fiscal cliff hole, but that sales tax, you've got to figure in inflation. So it's not the windfall. It's good, but it's not the windfall that you think it is, because you got to figure out what inflation is in that increased sales tax number. So just remember when you're talking to folks, hey, it's not a big windfall in sales taxes because you got inflation to figure out, and it's never going to fill the fiscal cliff. People outside us don't necessarily understand that. Director Carey.
Question on the recovery ratios, Kevin. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So we have to go back. You can't use COVID money, just back to the way it was before
Correct.
COVID. But it looks, if I understood you right, we are basically plugging in something. It's kind of like the old budget balancing lines. So we're plugging something in because, I hope everybody in this room, I can't imagine the state is going to allow at least that one thing not to be fixed before next year, but who knows? But they could at least extend the exemption. And then, so I understand that.
Yep.
And then as far as the revenue, the actual marks, so I forget what slide that was, where you show the 74 million, all the discretionary. That's the one major action we're proposing here, is that we take all discretionary funding and give it to CTA, since they are projected to hit the fiscal cliff ahead of the other two. Okay, just I'm okay, and I understand, Leanne, you said we don't have to, come up with the solution here, but I think the purpose of the committee is to get consensus and take something to the board. And I would be okay with the 17, if the, I guess when I said earlier, I'd be okay with taking 17 million on the ICE funding and plugging it in to help close the gap in 25. That would be contingent on one, I mean, if CTA is relying on it for some security project that they've got in the works, even if they haven't expended the money, I guess I'd want to know that first. But again, I'm basically okay with what staff has presented here today.
Director Kotarik.
So thanks for the presentation, Kevin. I think one of the key things that we really need to do is communicate this issue very, very well. I feel like we kind of caught flat-footed with the good news that the sales tax base is expanded and it makes our problem a little less worse. And I don't know the right way to do that, but I think figuring out some public, accessible way to see the revenues coming in and that being dynamic and broadcasting that as that dynamic is important. But I think that also means that we have to probably fix on a date when cuts are going to happen, when service is going to have to be reduced. And I think that that should be across the board for all of the service boards. And I think we have to make our best guess during this budget cycle of when that date is and stick with it. Because honestly, it's probably just a difference of a couple weeks of when that happens or it doesn't. And I think really broadcasting that, being transparent about that, showing the input, showing the forecast, so that no one can take issue with not seeing what's out there. And then we can say, look, we're doing our due diligence to really broadcast and get ready for this fiscal cliff. So that's number one. The second piece is I think it's important for us to focus on the expense growth during this budget cycle and getting a clear idea of where the expenses are coming from. And again, transparently communicating that to everyone. We worked pretty hard on everyone looking at what the savings plan is that each of the service boards have and what we can do together. I think we've got to dig in as deep as we can to really get as much savings as we can. And we need a revenue growth plan. Growth is a part of the solution here, and getting more ridership is where we should be really, really focused. But I think we should exhaust all options, and I'm curious to hear from Melinda, Jim, and Nora on what we think about revenue growth. Are there things like, even fare evasion is an issue that we've kind of danced around a little bit. I think, Jim, you brought up when you were here a few months back of a trip to Philly and how they found 30% of their riders, I think if I'm remembering right, from your trip that weren't paying. And we kind of anecdotally know that that's happening on the system. I don't think we can do anecdotally anymore across the service boards. We've got to make sure that we're looking at revenues that are already there that we're not capturing to really sort of show the public and really show the General Assembly that we're doing everything we can. I think this is the cycle.
Pat?
Can I just respond to the point about the transparency and sharing? We told the board last meeting, and we've already got this, a webpage specifically on our website that is all just directly focused on the fiscal cliff, and putting up all this information incrementally as we go and building, using that as sort of building blocks. So we are sharing that very publicly, and all that kind of data as we gather these pieces will be shared through that website as well, beyond coalition meetings and other outreach and communications that we do. I just wanted to remind the board of that.
I just wanted to clarify your comments, Tom, that we set a date when they all hit at the same time. This doesn't do that. So I'm
thinking during this budget cycle with the marks that we really ask the service boards in the same way that we're meeting at the board level as you have your meetings together to think about what that date is, to communicate down to the Springfield, this is the date in which we're going to have to start reducing service, and to be specific about what those reductions are. Because right now, I think that's still nebulous in the public mind. We know we're facing a cliff. We know that cuts are going to happen, but we haven't really been specific about when they will happen and what they are. I think Philly is the scary model that we don't want to find ourselves in, but they should get credit for being really transparent I forget what the date is for their first round. You can go to their website and, the equivalent of the Halsted 8 bus ends at 8 o'clock. They're calling it a curfew. There's a curfew for service at 9 p.m. I think we've been sort of, talking about that internally. It is time during this budget cycle, I think, to really elevate that conversation and be very specific about it, because this is serious. We've said it's serious, but now we really need to show the detail. And I think that's also going to increase the interest in Springfield, who now has to deal with a whole lot of other issues. The, federal action is now putting pressure on other budgets. It's not just transit. And I think we've got to really tell the truth about what's happening in a very specific way.
Okay, so each service board, in the budget process by October, when smush the revenue and expenses all together, at that point, they will determine a date. It won't be the same date across all 3 service boards. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Well, I think that's for discussion. I think that, if it's a difference between a couple months, do you start instilling cuts or service reductions so that the network really has as much time to work together? Because again, we're going to have PACE service running to a CTA stop that could be closed. You're going to have a Metro station, think about a Cubs game getting off at Irving Park, and then all of a sudden you can't get east to the Cubs game. Those are real impacts in the network when one system is surviving sort of longer. And I think we need to tell the General Assembly and the public, this is a network and this is a system. This doesn't just work in one geography. People move all over the place, and having the system, sort of hit those cuts at the same time is something that we can only do so much in the budget, but we even, with all of these sort of extraordinary measures, it's a difference of a couple months. And so we might as well really try to plan accordingly.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I don't think these marks, if they're approved this way, do that, because the revenue wouldn't be, PACE won't hit the cliff till 2027, and it projected.
And right, and I think that, again, I'm not sort of going to let up on us exhausting the COVID relief funding that, again, we gave to each individual service boards based on our best guess of what everybody would need. And if we really are facing that very acute situation, I think it's worth revisiting through budget amendments, et cetera. If we find ourselves 7-8 months and the General Assembly hasn't acted, I think we're going to find ourselves in some really strange and, uncomfortable places that none of us want to be. And I think the early planning to say, this is a date for the region when service is going to change, and coordinate that and honestly work together. There might be some PACE service that can help on CTA in Evanston or in the south suburbs. There's all sorts of different things that I think we really need to think very differently on how we do service planning in this, again, an environment none of us want to be in. But I think it owes it to the General Assembly that we're going through that process, doing it in a very transparent way, doing it very coordinated, so that we can say, look, this is it. This is the date. These are the things that are going to happen. You act or this happens.
Let me ask one question and then I'll stop. Leanne, if we get to October, we approve marks, and we get to October and when each service board hits the cliff, we know more about it at that point in time. We could change the budget. We could change the revenue, or is it?
Yes, I think we noted that a couple of points through the presentation. Through all of this, the board can come back and amend even the expected revenues, as well as expected expenses. Those things can be sort of tweaked and changed. You don't want to be doing it every month. I think that was sort of part of the reason for doing a couple of the scenarios that we were talking about. So there's a bit sort of, we're doing some forward planning that relate to different ways of thinking about this. And there can still be, Director Kotarik's point about sort of, if we can do more work around sort of coordinated cuts, even if PACE technically, for example, isn't hitting any cliff in 26, but there could be still revisions in service on, across their services as well. And it might be solely, but that's work that, we at the RTA can support and help the service boards sort of do analysis, and we've already set up some foundational work to sort of support that modeling and analysis. But we can't do it without the input from the three service boards so that does have to happen very much sort of together. And we could continue to do that work over the sort of the rest of this into the fall.
I can say from CTA's perspective, certainly I agree. Clarity of messaging is so critical right now. There's a lot of noise right now on this topic. So making clear what this money gets us and what it doesn't, and the real realities that lay ahead of us is absolutely critical. And I know all of us feel that way, and we'll work together on that. I also feel, and it's nobody's intention, I brought this up at the last meeting, but we're very, very heavily weighted towards a cut doomsday narrative to this point of communication, Director Kotarik. And we have a huge opportunity here to also talk about growth for the region. And I completely understand that there's a lot to do. So everyone's calendars are full, and there's statutory requirements and tasks that need to be done around the realities of what money is identified and what's not. But I know at CTA, we are creating a third budget beyond what's required from RTA in terms of what the growth would also get us. And I feel strongly that that will also inspire action from the legislature in a way that may be even more impactful than the threats of the doomsday scenarios. And we're in a unique circumstance here in the Chicago region where we have a bill that was brought forth that put on the table, the really strong appetite for a large level of funding for the region. And I don't think any of us want to walk away from this period leaving lots of funding on the table. And I think we need to remain focused also on talking about growth, on avoiding the fiscal cliff entirely, not just aligning it, right? But giving people that mental picture of that possibility that we never get there and that we're bigger and stronger than ever.
I could not agree with you more. I mean, I just constantly try to harp in terms of discussion, sort of doomsday around what would frequency of service get you? What would improved service get you? You're 2 weeks ago when we opened the 3 new red line stops, that just is a reminder of people how we can improve the system. And everything, my father was a teacher, he goes, everything in life is exponential, better, more frequent service is just, it all, as Jim Derwinski will tell you, it all compounds itself. So yeah, keep harping that, Nora, because, it's all about frequency. We don't want the people looking down. We want them looking up as to what funding could get us, and how good our service could be. One other thing, just going to Director Kotarik's comments and having been in the legislature, the legislature, it's 177 individuals, all with different knowledge as well as just caring about mass transit. So they like one number. They want to know when's the timing, what's the number, and give me the list of cuts. And I always tell my former colleagues, they were a little early in the list of cuts, right? They think I'm going to get them a computer printout and show them what's going to get cut. And that's going to come sometime. But I always would remind them, I don't think you really want these list of cuts out there, or these people your constituents will be in your office. But the legislature, as good as they are and as sophisticated as they are, they're going to want to know, what's the number? Is it 771 or is it something else? When's it going to happen? And eventually they're going to be clamoring, because we're all used to seeing school aid formula list. Having been there, I always like my printout. What does it mean for my district? What happens to the bus that goes by my office or my house? So we're going to have to get that for them. Just for the 3 service boards, the other important component for legislative lobbying and knowledge is, who are your vendors? I know you procure things from Peoria and Pinckneyville and Danville. So that list, and Tom and I have looked at what other, and so has Leanne, what other of our brothers nationwide have done. But, you know, when I'm down there trying to tell a downstate legislator how important mass transit is to our state's economy, and it puts money in schools in the nooks and crannies of rural Illinois, knowing if there's vendors, if you're buying things from somebody in Freeport, that list is really important. Just to show your overall impact on the state of Illinois, because I know you're buying stuff from all over the place. And, you know, I want to show downstate legislators, you know, I use Peoria and Pinckneyville all the time, that we put money in your schools. So you do have an interest in mass transit in Chicago. Plus, the more people that ride mass transit, it probably means more money for the road fund for downstaters, which is what they really, really look at. And the last thing is Champaign-Urbana moves more people. And granted, they have the University of Illinois and there's fee, but they move, Champaign-Urbana moves more individuals on mass transit than Indianapolis, Indiana. That's, you know, I try to tell my downstate friends, mass transit's really important in downstate Illinois too. You know, even in Macomb, Illinois, they just hit a millionth rider on a new system they set up down there. So mass transit's critical to our brothers and sisters downstate, but knowing what you buy from downstate Illinois really, really would help as well. Leanne, where are we now? Or Kevin, what do you?
Well, I think it's kind of a question back to you as RTA board members. Have you had sufficient conversation to get you to a point of being able to make decisions based on decisions for how to deal with 2025 on the ADA shortfall, and then identifying and essentially at the next meeting locking in the expected revenues? So, I mean, I think that's where we're at. And just sort of as a continued reminder, to do any of this forward planning, these additional ideas about service cuts, we can't even really begin to do that until we kind of lock in what the expected revenues are. And so do that step, and then through the budget process, we can continue the rest of those conversations that you've all been talking about.
Director Groven, Dennis, you guys pretty comfortable as to where we are?
Yeah, I think it's been a great conversation. Kind of valid points, both sides of all of these things. I think for me, there are answers that need to come back to us, and urgently. Things around, again, the idea of to make the ADA process more self-reliant. What does that mean if we start to ladder up a fare or cap to 30 days or things? Again, trying to, as best we can from this point, get a feel for what's the impact to the public we're trying to serve. But I think we need some of those answers coming back to us. But I think we can have a good conversation with our broader colleagues on, I guess it's next Thursday, a week from Thursday.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, again, I think give credit to the staff, just it's all in front of us. Truthfully, I think we're ready. I mean, I'm ready to go. Let's, look at the funding for ICE and let's bring to the board just the rescission of or the appropriations for the 25 budget, and let's reduce it by that 17 million. Let's go. I think we're ready. I've got the information. I feel pretty confident about the way I'm going to vote.
Nora, you'll get us whatever the ICE funding was with respect to safety.
Yeah, we can share details on what that investment is planned.
I can also just add, I mean, the staff just gave me a quick on what those grants were for. And hang on, where is it? It's for the 2025, it was it's in here somewhere. It was for signage, digital signage, and
yeah, I was going to confirm. I believe it's related to train tracker enhancements that we were looking towards. It has been used in the past, as the chairman was saying, also for security cameras. The plan this year was regarding train tracker, and we can provide some more details on the scale and focus of that plan.
Yeah, good. And going to your, your third budget, I always love to tell people I want to live in a world where I don't really need train tracker. I can just walk to my local L or CTA stop and know that within a few minutes, something's going to be there to take me there. That's my vision. Melissa, our wonderful PR staff here, Melissa Meyer and Tina, constantly talk about frequency, talk about, the vision of what the world could be like. When I step on my L platform and there's, 5 or 6 minute service intervals or whatever it's going to be. So.
Agreed, Chairman. And don't get me going, because now I can also say a comment earlier about, and I understand if people have a choice between an Uber and a bus, they would take an Uber. Not if we invest in bus infrastructure in the way we should.
Absolutely.
And that bus is running faster than the Uber, right? And keeping that vision alive of what transit can provide.
My friend Senator Simmons and I have become blood brothers over bus rapid transit and other issues. So I'm on the program, Nora, very much on the program. JD or Bill Colson, if you're still with us, anything you need from the rest of today?
No, I think it's been very useful. There's not a lot I could meaningfully add at this point, but the process is on its way. I commend everyone for their efforts so far.
Thank you. And Rick and Chris and Melinda, when Rick and I were talking last night, he goes, well, it's your program. You got to tell us at pace what it's going to be. And I kidded with Chairman Kwasniewski, hey, yeah, you can, the RTA is the final arbiter and you can blame us for any little nuances you don't like. So, we'll, for better or for worse, kind of tell you what it is. But you can blame us, Melinda.
Not my goal, Mr. Chairman. My
Perfect.
goal is to provide good service.
You bet. And you do that. Tom.
Thanks, Chairman. I mean, I think we've got enough of the potential options to act. And again, what do we want to keep? Not necessarily about what we want to cut. I think it's clear we want to keep this program in a modified way. I think the ICE funding, I do have some reservations about it. I mean, as an advocate, I think I came to this board and talked about the formalization of that funding, and instead of using it as a competitive grant to really incentivize what the General Assembly had in mind for that program, which was to spur innovation, coordination, and enhancement, not to just sort of pull it together because we have one service that's running wildly beyond expectations. So I think before ICE is on the table, a couple things that I want to make sure that all of us see is one, that a full running to ground of the COVID emergency relief funding. We're at an emergency situation with a cost overrun for this RAP and TAP program. So let's really run that to ground. Let's not take for granted the feds might let us, they might not. Let's ask Region 5, let's ask FTA, what are our options, and get an answer so that we're actually, dealing with real information and what we know we can do. And then also getting a real grounding of the COVID relief funding. If, we've had a balance, how much is that interest accrued? Let's really run to ground that option. The second piece is having that aggressive, really approach. Let's have a lesson learned here. Why did the forecast of ridership, why was it off so much? What's going on there? Probably need more than just surveys. And I think part of that aggressive approach really needs to have some action, this action plan 2.0 as it's been called, to really make the existing fixed route system much more accessible. I think the other part of this, just for ICE, my recommendation too is let's not lose the spirit of that program. Melinda, you brought up the revision program, which is great. You guys have an excellent consultant that's been working on that. Nora has the same consultant. So let's make sure that when we're doing bus redesign, we are doing it as a region. I think it's really, really important. We brought this up during the last budget cycle to make sure that the bus redesigns are happening at the same time. That's the coordination component of ICE. And if we're putting that on the table, I think that's a really important requirement that we show the General Assembly that we could do this. And obviously we'll come up with a better product. A lot of those revision routes do come into the city of Chicago, and they all go out in the suburbs just like everybody does in our ridership. And so I think that's a really important piece to communicate back as we go through this.
Director Ross, I don't know if you're still on, you want?
Yes, I am.
What's your thoughts here, JD?
Well, I've appreciated all the good discussion today and the options that have been laid out for us. I guess more than anything, I respect the necessity for us to all be on the same page in terms of garnering legislative support as we move forward. So in spite of my concern about whether this could be a loan or not, I'm prepared to support the staff recommendation and move forward so that we can get on with the business of 26 and beyond.
Great, thank you. Thank you. We'll take up the capital slides, Kevin and Bill, when we do our RTA meeting, our regular RTA meeting next week. Anything else that needs to come before us for a future meeting? You know, it'll be subject to the call of the chair. We'll reach out and check with your schedules. But we have our regular RTA board meeting coming up, which should be interesting. Can't thank you all enough. I know how busy you all are for taking the time to do this, but I think this is very productive. I think it sends a very good message to the legislature and our riders that we do collaborate all the time, and just physically us being all here together, both as executive directors and board members of our various appointing authorities, I think, aside from the collective wisdom that's here, sends a good message. And again, Melinda, Jim, Nora, your staffs, the people that operate your operations every day, you're the best in the business. And our colleagues recognize it nationally, and I hope to remind the riders of metropolitan Chicago every day that we try, we hear, and we are, at least operationally, we have the best people that there is in any transit system in the United States, on the lowest funding and the most efficient that's around. So thank you all. We are adjourned. Do we need a motion to adjourn physically? I got
So moved.
Second. Director Yonan wisely moves, we adjourn, seconded by Director Mondero. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we are adjourned. Thank you all once again.
Be well, everyone.